I know this isn't what you expected. To be honest, it's not what I expected either. I've spent most of my life keeping my private thoughts to myself, only speaking when I felt something was worth saying. At my age, you learn that most things aren't. But what happened to me one night, when I was completely alone, is something I can't take to the grave in silence. There was no audience, no cameras, no script, just an old man, an empty house, and a country that felt like it was tearing itself apart. I went to bed thinking about headlines and arguments, about people yelling at each other on screens. I didn't go to sleep looking for a vision. I wasn't asking for a sign. But in the middle of that darkness, something shifted. I found myself standing in a place that wasn't my bedroom anymore. The air was heavy, the light was soft, and it felt like the world had stopped breathing. And then I saw him. Jesus appeared, as real as any man I've ever met, and he told me something about America that shook me to my core. And tonight, I am going to tell you exactly what he said. The night it happened didn't feel special at all. There was no thunderstorm, no strange wind, no eerie feeling creeping up my spine. Just an old man in a quiet house, trying to make peace with a country that no longer looked like the place he'd grown up in. I was alone in my living room. No TV on, no music, just the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the ticking of an old clock on the wall. The kind of silence that doesn't bother you when you're young, but starts to sound heavier when you realize you've outlived most of the people who used to fill it. My mind was doing what it always does late at night. Wandering, headlines, arguments, footage of people shouting at each other on opposite sides of the same flag. I thought about war's ID acted in on screen, and the strange feeling that the real war now was happening in people's living rooms, through their phones, in their heads. I remember rubbing my eyes, feeling the weight of my age in my bones. I told myself just close them for a moment, not sleep, just rest. There's a difference you learn to respect when you get old. At some point, there's no clean line where it happened. The room started to dim in a way that had nothing to do with the lights. The edges of the furniture blurred. The ticking of the clock stretched out, like someone was pulling time itself apart. I knew I was drifting, but it didn't feel like ordinary sleep. It felt like something was reaching in. The air changed first. It grew dense. Not cold, not warm, just heavy, like the atmosphere before a storm that never quite arrives. I could still feel the armrest under my hand, the fabric of the chair under my fingers, but they didn't feel like the most real thing in the room anymore. Then the silence deepened. Not the silence of an empty house, but the kind of silence you only feel in a church at night, when the doors are locked and the candles have burned out. A silence that feels like it's listening. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, a product of age, memories, too many years of pretending to be in control on screen, but the more I tried to label it, the less control I felt I had. It was as if someone had taken the world I knew and slowly turned the volume down. The living room faded, not with a sudden cut, but like an old film dissolving into another scene. One moment I was staring at the outline of the coffee table. The next, the floor beneath my feet didn't quite feel solid. The walls were gone. The ceiling, gone. The only thing left was a faint, undefined light, soft, pale, suspended in a darkness that didn't feel threatening, just endless. I wasn't floating. I wasn't standing. I just was. There's a point in any man's life where he realizes he isn't in charge anymore. Not of his body, not of his time, not of his future. He had had that realization before, in quieter ways. But this was different. I wasn't in charge of where I was or what I was about to see. For the first time in a very long time, I felt small. My heart wasn't pounding. My breath wasn't racing. It was worse than that. Everything in me went still, like my soul was holding its breath. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see a figure. Not yet. But there was a certainty rising inside me, calm and terrifying at the same time. Something or someone had stepped into my loneliness, And whatever was about to happen next, it wasn't just another dream from an old man's tired mind. It was an encounter. He didn't arrive with trumpets or lightning. There was no rush of wings, no choir in the distance, no blaze of fire. The light that had been hanging there in the dark just thickened. It gathered itself, like mist turning into form. And then, as simply as a man stepping out from behind a curtain, he was there. I've met presidents, generals, studio heads who thought they were gods. I've stood face to face with men who held the power to end careers, end lives, end nations. None of them made me feel the way I felt in that moment. Small, exposed, seen. He didn't look like any painting I grew up with. No halo, no polished face. He looked real, weathered, like someone who had walked a long way through every kind of human sorrow and never once turned back. His eyes were the first thing I understood. They weren't the eyes of an actor. They weren't the eyes of a judge weighing a sentence. They were steady, clear, and when they met mine, I felt every defense had built over 90 years fall away without a sound. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, to demand if I was dying, if this was judgment, if this was some kind of final scene I hadn't rehearsed for. But my mouth wouldn't open, not out of fear, out of something deeper, reverence. He took a step closer, and the floor beneath us, whatever it was, responded like water that somehow held weight. No sound, no echo, just presence. When he finally spoke, his voice didn't boom. It was quiet, but it landed inside me like a hammer. Clint. Just my name. Nothing more. But I heard my entire life in the way he said it. The child, the young man, the angry, middle-aged man, the old, tired man id become. You've spent your life telling stories, he said. Stories about justice, about vengeance, about what a man deserves. I swallowed, or tried to. You've watched nations rise and fall on screens, he continued. You've played the man who walks into chaos and restores order, the man who cleans up the town. There was no accusation in his tone, just truth stated plainly. But this time, he said, you are not the one holding the gun. You are not directing the scene. You are here to listen. Those words pinned me more securely than any hand on my shoulder could have. Something in me wanted to protest, to say I was too old, too set in my ways, too close to the end for whatever this was. Instead, all that came out barely was a whisper. Why me? For a moment, he didn't answer. He just looked at me as if he was searching not for a reason, but for the part of me that could bear to hear it. Because you know what it means to be alone in a room, he said at last, and because your country is full of people who feel that way now. No vision yet. No images of flags or cities or crowds. Just that sentence hanging in the air between us. My hands trembled. Not from age this time, but from the weight of what I hadn't seen. This wasn't about my career or my reputation or whether people would believe me. This was about America. And for the first time, standing in front of him, I understood something simple and terrifying. He hadn't come to talk about my past. He had come to show me our future. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't point to a map. He didn't say, look over there. He just said, watch. And the darkness around us shifted. At first, I thought I was back in a movie theater. A massive screen opened in front of us, but there were no seats, no projector, no sound system, just images, sharp and alive, moving in silence. I saw a house, nothing special. A simple, ordinary American home. The kind you'd pass 1,000 times and never think twice about. Inside, a family sat around a table. No one was talking. Every face was lit by a different screen. A phone, A tablet, a TV in the corner, mumbling headlines. Their hands were close enough to touch. No one did. This, he said softly, is what you already know. I watched arguments scroll by, words typed in anger, faces tightening as they swallowed more outrage than food. No one looked up. No one looked at each other. You've seen this, he said. You've lived in a world of noise. He was right. I had seen it on the news, on sets, in restaurants. People together, but not really together. The first layer of the truth. Familiar. Uncomfortable. Easy to dismiss. Then the image changed. Same house. Same table. But now I could hear what they weren't saying. Fear. It leaked out between the cracks of their silence. Fear of losing status. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being weak. Fear of the other side. Fear that if they stopped shouting, they might hear something in themselves they couldn't control. They are not angry because they are strong, he said. They are angry because they are afraid. I felt that one cut closer. I built a life on playing men whose anger looked like strength, men who settled things with a gun, a punch, a hard line delivered in the final scene. But this wasn't that kind of anger. This was the kind that rotted you from the inside. Their hearts are shrinking, he said, not from lack of information, from lack of compassion. The images began to move faster now. Streets, schools, churches, offices, people scrolling, yelling, posting, blocking, always reacting, never listening. Every face carried the same tightness in the jaw, the same tired rage in the eyes. America is not dying from the outside, he said. She is suffocating from within. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The second layer of truth was worse than the first. Not just people isolated, people hardening, choosing numbness over pain, choosing division over vulnerability. Then the third layer came. The screen vanished. We were no longer watching scenes. We were standing above something vast and pulsing. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was dark, but not empty. Beating, strained, covered in hairline fractures of light. This, he said, is the heart of your nation. Every fracture was a wound. Every pulse was slower than it should have been. I could feel it struggling, not just from politics or policies or leaders, from millions of quiet daily choices to turn away instead of toward, if the heart breaks. He said, laws will not save it. If love fails, power cannot hold it together. I felt a pressure in my chest, like someone was mirroring that broken rhythm inside my own body. I put a hand over my heart without thinking. It was beating too fast. You thought the danger was out there, he said, in enemies, in weapons, in governments. A pause, heavy, final. But the true danger, he whispered, is in here. The image of that fractured heart burned itself into me. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't apocalypse. It was something quieter, a slow, steady collapse. And in that moment, I understood something I'd never seen from any director's chair or camera lens. The greatest threat to America wasn't a bomb or a foreign flag. It was what would happen if her people finally forgot how to love one another. I wish I could tell you I took it like a man, that I squared my shoulders, nodded, and said something noble about carrying the burden, that I accepted the vision calmly, like a prophet in some stained glass window. I didn't. The moment that fractured heart faded from my sight, something inside me buckled. My knees gave first, not because the ground moved, but because whatever was holding me upright in that place let go. I went down slowly, like an old tree, finally giving in to the wind after years of pretending it could still stand straight. My hand clutched at my chest. It was instinct more than anything. I felt my heart hammering, trying to outrun what I'd just seen. Every beat sounded too loud in my head. I can't, I heard myself say, but I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't know what I couldn't do. Breathe, believe this, carry it, all of the above. I've played men falling apart on screen, drunk, broken, wounded, grieving. I know the beats, the heavy breathing, the trembling hands, the stare into the distance. But this wasn't performance. There was no camera to catch it, no second take to make it prettier. My hands shook, my shoulders shook, and then, finally, my voice broke. "You're too late," I whispered. I don't even know if I was talking to him or to myself. It's already gone too far. They hate each other. They don't listen. They don't trust anyone. What can I do? What can anybody do? Memories didn't just pass through my mind. They attacked it. Scenes from my own life, cut in like rough edits. Arguments ID won by being louder, meaner, sharper. People ID dismissed with a look or a line. Years where ID worn my silence like armor, convincing myself it was dignity when sometimes it was just cowardice. I saw my younger self, the one who thought emotions were a weakness and distance was power. The man who made a career out of being untouchable. The man who let people project whatever they wanted onto him and never bothered to correct them. I saw the people I didn't call back. The apologies I never gave. The chances to say I was wrong, that I let pass, because it was easier to stay silent. And then another thought hit me, harder than all the rest. I had helped tell the kind of stories that made anger look heroic. I am not saying my movies caused this. That would be arrogant and stupid. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that I had contributed to a culture that worshipped the lone, hardened man who solves problems with force, not with understanding. Tears started to fall, not dramatic, heaving sobs, just steady, humiliating lines down an old man's face. I couldn't stop them. "I don't deserve to be hearing this," I said. "There are better men, better believers, better preachers. Why show me?" The answer didn't come as a lecture. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't list my sins. He didn't remind me of every failure and scandal and secret ID tried to bury. He just watched me, let me break. There's a kind of mercy in being allowed to come apart in front of someone who doesn't flinch. My breathing turned shallow. I pressed my forehead against whatever passed for ground in that place. I didn't care how it looked. Pride is a luxury you lose when you realize you've helped build the very world that now terrifies you. I thought I understood this country. I managed. I thought I knew what was wrong with it. I blamed politicians. I blamed the media. I blamed the other side. I never thought it was the heart. All this time, it was the heart. For a long moment, he said nothing. I felt the weight of my years. Every mistake, every role, every opinion I'd been so sure of. They all sat on my back like stones. I wanted to disappear under them. Then, in the middle of that collapse, I felt something I didn't expect. A hand, not on my head, not pushing me down, on my shoulder. Firm, steady, human. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't erase the shame, but it kept me from sinking any further. "You break," he said quietly, "so you can finally see." I realized then that this wasn't punishment. It was surgery, and you don't get surgery without being cut open first. He let me stay on my knees longer than my pride would have liked. The grip on my shoulder didn't tighten. It didn't try to haul me up. It just stayed there, solid, like an anchor in water that had finally stopped pretending it wasn't storming. When I could finally breathe without my chest rattling, I spoke again. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" For the first time since this began, I heard something like sadness in his silence. Not frustration, not anger, just the sadness of someone who has watched the same mistake repeated for a very long time. "I did not come to give you a task," he said. "I came to give you a truth." Slowly, I lifted my head. I didn't stand. I wasn't ready for that yet. But I looked up enough to see his face again. There was no disappointment in it, just a kind of steady grief wrapped in patience. "You think in terms of battles and victories," he said, "of winning and losing. You think if the right side wins, the country will heal." He shook his head. "America doesn't need another victory," he said. "America needs a change of heart." I opened my mouth, then closed it. ID spent decades watching people pin their hope on elections, movements, slogans, revolutions. It all sounded big, important, historic. A change of heart sounded small. "How?" I asked. It came out harsher than I intended. "How does a whole country change its heart?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he did what he's always done in the stories I used to half listen to in church as a boy. He told me 3 things. The first, he said, is this: the loudest people are often the most afraid. Images flickered around us again. Comment sections, talk shows, street protests, dinner tables, people shouting over one another, faces twisted, veins showing in their necks. They shout, he said, because if they stop talking, they might hear the small voice inside them asking if they are wrong, and they are terrified of that. I thought about times it filled silence with more words than were needed, just to avoid a feeling I didn't want to touch. If you only answer noise with more noise, he said, nothing changes. Someone has to be brave enough to be quiet, to listen, to ask, "What are you so afraid of?" He let that sit for a moment before continuing. The second lesson, he said, is this: love is the only power that does not corrupt. I almost laughed, bitter and tired. Power corrupts. Everyone knows that. It's the kind of line that shows up in scripts, in speeches, in history books. Men chase power, he went on, because they believe it will protect them. But power without love hardens the heart. It makes enemies out of neighbors. It turns disagreement into war. He looked at me in a way that made me feel like every role it ever played was being weighed. "You have seen what men will do to keep power," he said. "You have seen what nations will do. But love, real love, is different. It costs you. It strips you. It asks you to serve instead of rule. That is why so few choose it." I thought of scenes ID lived and scenes ID filmed men. Choosing the gun over the apology, the threat over the hand extended, and the third, I asked quietly. "The third," he said, "is this: a nation survives when its people remember one another." The images shifted again, not to flags or monuments, but to small, almost forgettable moments. A stranger holding a door, a neighbor checking in, a hand on a shoulder that says, "I see you." "Your country is losing the habit of remembering," he said. "You remember your opinions, your labels, your wounds, but you are forgetting each other's faces, each other's stories, each other's humanity." He paused, and his voice dropped into something that felt almost like a plea. When people remember one another, they cannot easily hate. They cannot easily turn away. They cannot easily allow evil to grow unnoticed. I let those words sink in. This wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a political plan. It wasn't a blueprint for some grand campaign. It was basic, painfully simple. Listen instead of shouting. Choose love over power. Remember people instead of categories. "It sounds too small," I admitted. "Too slow. Too soft." He nodded. "It is small," he said. "It is slow. It is soft. And yet it is the only thing I have ever used to truly change the world." There was no thunderclap to underline it, no flash of lightning, just a quiet conviction settling into the cracks that had just been opened inside me. I realized then that the lesson wasn't about what everyone else needed to do. It started with what I needed to be. I don't know how long I stayed there, kneeling under the weight of those three truths. At some point, the trembling stopped, not because the fear was gone, but because something else had settled in beside it. A strange, quiet resolve. Like a man who's finally heard the diagnosis, has been avoiding, and for the first time, knows exactly what he's up against. The light around us began to shift again, not fading this time, softening. I realized I was still clutching at his words, the way a drowning man clutches at anything that floats. Listen instead of shouting. Choose love over power. Remember one another. It sounded so simple. It felt impossible. What do I do with this? I asked. I am old. I am one man. I've made my share of mistakes, maybe more than my share. What am I supposed to do with a vision like this? He didn't answer with a grand commission. There was no, go change the world. No scroll handed to me. No list of instructions. He just looked at me with those steady eyes and said, start where you are. Start where you are. I've heard a lot of lines in my life. Written some. Delivered more. But that one, it lodged itself in me like a seed, pushed into freshly turned soil. Be slower to speak, he said. Be quicker to listen. Refuse to despise the people you disagree with. Love them instead. Remember them, see them, and tell the truth you've been shown. It didn't sound heroic. It didn't sound cinematic. It sounded human. The light around him grew brighter, not blinding, just full. It wrapped him the way dawn wraps a horizon. I felt something in me resisting the end of it, like a child not wanting to leave a safe room. Will it be enough? I asked. I hated how fragile my voice sounded. He didn't promise me a happy ending. He didn't say, yes, everything will work out. He just answered with the only thing that really matters when you're standing at the edge of eternity. It will be faithful, he said. And that is what I ask of you. Then, slowly, he placed his hand over mine where it rested on my chest. For a second, my heart fluttered like a bird trapped in a cage. Then, the rhythm steadied. Slower, deeper, like it had been misfiring for years and finally found its beat again. The light rose, the darkness receded. And just like that, the scene dissolved. I woke up in my chair. The refrigerator was still humming. The old clock was still ticking on the wall. My living room was exactly the way ID left it. Same shadows, same furniture, same silence. But I wasn't the same. My face was wet. I hadn't cried in my sleep since I was a boy. But there they were, tears drying in the lines time had carved into my skin. My hand was still resting on my chest, as if it had stayed there as a reminder of where the real wound was. I stood up slowly. My legs ached. My back protested. My age had not miraculously reversed. The only miracle was inside. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. It was early. Dawn hadn't quite broken yet, but the sky was softening at the edges. That gray-blue moment when darkness doesn't want to let go and light hasn't fully claimed the day. The street outside was empty. No crowds, no protests, no sirens. Just a quiet, sleeping piece of America. For a long time, I just stood there and looked at it. Not as a director, not as an actor, not as a man with opinions, but as someone who had been shown the inside of its heart. I thought about the neighbors, whose names I barely knew. The people I passed without really seeing. The stranger's ID written off in my mind because of a headline, a comment, a label. Remember them. I don't know how long I stayed at that window, but when I stepped away, I knew this much. I couldn't go back to the version of myself who thought this was just about politics and headlines. I made coffee with hands that still shook a little. I sat at the table where ID, eaten 1,000 quiet meals alone. And for the first time, I bowed my head not out of habit, not out of show, but because I genuinely didn't know how to carry what had been given without help. Then, later, when the sun was fully up and the world started moving again, I did something simple. I picked up a pen. I wrote down everything I could remember, every word, every image, every feeling. Not because I wanted to write a script, not because I wanted attention, but because I knew this much. Silence is how hearts die. And if I'd truly been shown the heart of my country, then staying silent would be the one thing I could no longer do. That was the start, not of a movement, of a different man. I didn't speak about that dream for a long time, not because I doubted it, but because I needed to understand the man who walked out of it. You don't receive a message like that and simply return to your routines. Something shifts, something rearranges the furniture inside your soul. Days passed, then weeks. The world kept doing what the world does, arguing, dividing, performing. But inside me, there was a quiet space I didn't recognize, a distance between impulse and response, a softer place to land when anger tried to rise. I didn't become a saint. I didn't turn into a preacher. I just slowed down enough to notice what I'd ignored before. I started seeing faces instead of categories. I started hearing fear under people's anger. I started recognizing loneliness hiding beneath their noise. And every time I felt the old habits creeping back, the quick judgment, the hard edge, the need to be right, I heard his voice again. Start where you are. I realized something then, something I wish I had understood earlier in life. The smallest change in one heart is louder than the biggest speech shouted across a country. People don't soften because they lose an argument. They soften because someone finally sees them without trying to win. And maybe that was the point of the dream. Not to warn me about doom or politics or prophecy, but to peel away the layers I'd built around myself. To show me that a fractured nation isn't a political crisis first. It's a relational one, a spiritual one, a human one. I learned that you can't fix a country you refuse to love. And you can't love a country if you don't love the people in front of you, the ones who are easy and the ones who aren't. In the silence of my own home, with only an old clock ticking in the background, I realized how many years I'd spent mistaking strength for distance. How often I'd chosen the safety of detachment over the risk of connection. How many chances I'd missed to listen when listening mattered more than winning. Maybe that's why he came to me the way he did. Not with thunder, with quiet, not with flames, with presence, not with orders, with truth. And the truth was simple. We forget each other too easily. We forget the weight of another person's fear. We forget the softness of compassion. We forget how fragile the human heart becomes when no one holds it for a while. But remembering that is where healing begins. I look at my country now and I don't see enemies. I don't see sides. I see people who have forgotten how to speak gently, how to forgive quickly, how to love without asking if the other person deserves it. And I see myself among them. A man who wasted years thinking the world would change only when the powerful changed it. A man who didn't realize the smallest act of kindness can echo further than the loudest declaration of outrage. If the dream taught me anything, it was this. The heart of a nation breaks long before its laws do, and it heals long before its headlines admit it. All it takes is one person remembering another person, one hand on a shoulder, one moment of patience, one choice to listen, one small act that refuses to let the fracture widen. Maybe you don't believe my story. Maybe you'll say it was a dream, an old man's mind, wandering through the dust of memory. That's all right. You don't have to believe me. But if you've felt the loneliness in this country, if you've heard the anger in its voices, if you've seen the distance between people who used to care then maybe this message wasn't meant to convince you. Maybe it was meant to remind you. Remind you of something you once knew but forgot somewhere along the way. And if you're still here, if you're still listening, then hear this. The heart of a nation is healed one person at a time, and maybe that person is you.